All right. We're back today. Thanks for listening. Appreciate everybody that keeps coming back. Today, we're going to talk about something that's a little bit different. It's a sobering topic, but also a helpful topic. We're going to focus on how to live a normal life after loss and grief. My guest is an HR executive. She's also an author. She wrote a book called 100 Acts of Love. On top of that, she has her own consulting company where she works with HR executives and management professionals as they help the employee population work through grief and loss in a company. She's a widow. She's a mom of three and lost her husband to cancer back in 2006. So I am really appreciative of her for taking the time to be with me today from California. Kim Hamer, thanks for being here.
Dave, thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure.
All right. I just talked to Kim before we started recording, and I said, you got to keep me together on this one. This could be a tough conversation. So Kim, if you could just take me back to 2006, I'm interested in getting to know what it was like to actually get that news. Maybe we could just build from there and then ultimately talk about how it led you to do what you're doing today.
Sure. So my husband hadn't been feeling well. He was an athlete and we were a very kind of healthy young couple. And he wasn't feeling well, and he went to the doctor, and the doctor at that point, he just wasn't able to breathe. And the funny thing is, I don't know about you, but I don't normally go to my husband's doctor's appointments with him, and he does not normally come to mine. But something about this, like right as he was about to ask me to come, I said, do you mind if I go with you? Because you just sort of knew something was not normal. So it was there that we got the cancer diagnosis. And I actually want to kind of skip ahead to a few days later when we were understanding how treatment was going to work. And I remember we were sitting in the room with this doctor, and he was looking at the computer and talking about what kind of chemo and the side effects of the chemo and how long. And I remember him saying, so you're not going to be able to work for 6 or 7 months. And I remember just stopped listening. I stopped listening at that point because we didn't have 7 months worth of savings in our account at that time. And the idea of I was just like, how are we going to survive? We can't not get treatment. That's not an option. But we have to keep a roof over our head at the same time. And I just remember being really sleepless for those couple of nights. And then I heard my husband on the phone 2 days later, and he was talking to his boss. I knew it was his boss because he had said his name, but he sounded really weird, just different. And he kept saying, oh, okay, thank you. And I go into the study and I said, what did your boss say? And he turns to me and his eyes are huge. And he says, Tom just let us know that he's going to cover my salary for the time that I am in treatment.
Wow.
And exactly, it just kind of blew me away. So the story, for those of you who don't know, my husband had large B-cell lymphoma. Most people ask for the details of that. It was stage 4, which means that it was all over. It had spread to other parts of his body by the time we caught it. He focused on, keeping himself alive and beating it. And that's exactly what he did. So it took actually 7 months to the day. And then there was this process of getting back on your feet, because any type of tragedy, any type of major life crisis does 2 things in a marriage. It brings out the best part of the marriage, and it brings out the worst part of the marriage. So after he was free of cancer, he was still dealing with side effects of chemo. We're still dealing with side effects of the cancer on our marriage. We're just sort of trying to work it through. And we managed to work it through. We managed to decide that we still like each other. We want to stay married. And then less than 2 years later, the cancer came back. And 4 months after that, he died. At the time, our kids were 12, 9, and 7. And I know a lot of people, oftentimes when I share this story in the public, when I speak, people always say, oh my gosh, you're so brave, you're so courageous, you're so strong. And what I really want your listeners to know is that that's not true at all. The reason I am here right now is because of all the sweet, kind, small acts of what I started calling acts of love that people did for us while he had cancer and after he died. And I think, I wrote the book because I make the joke, if 1 in 3 of us are going to get cancer, the other 2 need to know how to be supportive. And at the time, there really wasn't a lot of information out there. I also think there's this idea that if you're going to help, you need to like get in there and help. So I'm going to do grocery shopping for the next 4 months, or I'm going to babysit those kids every Thursday night, right? There's this thing of like, you need to get in there. And the things that people did, the small little things that people did had such a major effect on our lives. The story I like to tell is my neighbor, Nate, came up to our house one day after Art died. And he said, "When was the last time the oil was changed in your car?" And I was like, did not know, couldn't tell him if the light was red or yellow or green, like just had no idea. And he said, "I'll tell you what, I'm free. I'm going to be home all day tomorrow. Leave the keys in the mailbox. Text me, let me know when it's free to grab the car. I'll come up and grab it." So I did that. Then later on that day, I had to go out with the kids, and I walk out to the car and I start to cry. And I get in the car and I turn on the car and I'm sobbing, because not only had he changed the oil, he had had the car cleaned. And for those of you who have children, you know what a big deal that is. He had had the car cleaned inside and out, and he had filled it with gas. And it was such a simple gesture, right? I mean, it maybe cost him $50, and it took him maybe an hour to do everything. And it relieves such a huge burden off of me that I didn't even realize that I had, right? I mean, I knew that the car needed to be cleaned, but I couldn't really understand it. So that was a small, simple thing that he did that had such a huge impact on me and my children, because, they were like, mom's crying again, but she's a little bit happier about it. So what I really want people to know is that the small actions are really, really important. And then fast forward, my husband, I said my husband loses his life to cancer. I go back to work in the HR field. And what I notice is the same thing that I notice with our friends and family. Most people don't know what to do or what to say, and they're sort of scrambling, and they're embarrassed and they're ashamed. And as a result, they often don't do anything that's very helpful, or they don't say anything at all. And I notice the exact same thing happening in the workforce. And so what I set out to do now is to help managers who are, who don't know what to say and who are uncomfortable working with employees with cancer or death or any type of health crisis, and helping not just the manager, but the employee, the team, and the organization work through this diagnosis at work. And the other side of that, of course, is what you mentioned, is I also help organizations work through loss in the company, because I don't think that bringing in crisis counselors for 2 days is a solution to a loss that affects, many people daily for a very long time.
Right.
So that's sort of my story.
Right. Well, I hope I can do this conversation justice. There's so many layers to it. I was thinking as you were describing what happened, you as a family have to process this. And I think you probably at some point realized life does not stop. Nothing stops. Nobody's saying, okay, put everything on pause. The Hamers are having a problem. You're lucky enough to have a couple of good neighbors that helped out. But did you ever have that thought that now we have to deal with this, and the world is just racing?
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, I remember leaving the hospital. We left the hospital at 4 a.m. and it was my sister-in-law and my husband's best childhood friend. We had kind of ushered my husband out of this world. And I remember leaving the hospital and getting on the road and thinking, this is perfect. This is exactly how it's supposed to be. It's quiet. There aren't a lot of cars out or anything. And then the next day, after getting a couple hours of sleep, I went out for a walk and there were cars zooming by. And I kept thinking, no, like my whole world has just completely changed. And you're off to work, like kind of doing your thing. And like, there is a very deep sense of detachment that occurs, especially early on in the loss,
Right. Right.
because, your world is so different from everyone else's.
I have a number of friends and acquaintances who have been through similar, not all cancer related, some, and they all handle it differently. And as an outsider, depending on how close I feel, I either feel woefully inept in what I say or what I do. But I actually, most of the time I feel woefully inept. But I really do. I don't know, like my words are so limiting. Uh, One recently I sent somebody a playlist. I thought
That's
that was,
great.
yeah, but
That's
yeah, well,
great.
or a book. I sent somebody a book once.
Right.
It's just, but it feels so, I can't fill that hole. You know what I mean? It just feels so limiting, and the words are so restrictive. I don't know what, but I guess we're enough about what I feel. But during that moment, I'm just trying to put myself in your situation. Was there ever a part of you that became less tolerant of other people, at what might be bothering them in the moment, or what they chose to complain about or talk about, or, hey, I'm going here. Like, I remember talking to somebody who was going through a similar situation, and then I was listening to the conversations around, like, hey, what are you doing Christmas time? Or, hey, we're all planning a trip to Aruba. And the whole time I'm thinking, don't say that. Like, even
Right.
though they should be able to say that,
Right.
that there's somebody here who's not going to be able to participate. Won't be.
Right.
What
Right. Right.
what's right and what's wrong there? Like, I don't know. I don't know.
I think that's a great question. And first of all, I want you to know something, and this is going to sound a little harsh at first, but it's sort of the reality. We are inadequate. When it comes to the loss, there's nothing we can do or say that is going to take away that deep a pain. I mean, so I think we need to kind of embrace our inadequacy, and our job isn't to fill that hole or to remove that. Our job is simply to say to them, I love you. I see you. I care for you. You're not alone.
Mhm.
Right? That's our job in the moment. So that playlist is a brilliant idea, because it's just, I love you. I see you. Hopefully this will make you feel a little bit better. Like, just, I'm thinking about you. Here's my gift for you.
Right.
And, that's why the changing of the oil was so great, because it's, I love you. I see you. This is all I can do. Did it make me feel better that Art was dead? No.
Right. Right.
But it made my life a little bit easier. And really, the gift of it was that it made me feel seen. It made my journey feel seen. And that's sort of our job when it comes to someone else's tragic loss.
Right.
Our job is not to fix it. Our job is to sit in the yuck with them and say, I see you, I feel you, I hurt for you.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here. Right. That's why I got to be in this place where think I'm relatively sane. I don't know. You have to ask my kids. On various days I'm not, because people saw the loss. People went, oh my gosh, I'm hurting for her. I'm hurting because I miss him too.
Yeah.
And I'm hurting for her, and I'm hurting for her children. There must be something that I can do that encompasses that helps that hurt just a little bit, or so that she feels seen. So you are doing the right thing. Our words are inadequate, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't take action. So yes, the book took me, my husband died in 2009. It took me in 2015 to get it published. And because the first years there was a lot of resentment. There was a lot of people who would call and complain. My friends were just regular friends, and we would talk about our husbands beforehand. And now they were calling, complaining about their husbands. And I was like, you have a husband. He's alive. You should be you should be kissing him right now and being grateful that he's alive. So I think that there was that resentment. There was, we also hit financially, we got hit really hard. And so, there was, all of a sudden my kids were taking lots of music lessons, and then they weren't. Yeah. And my kids were, they were able to do these things, and then they weren't able to do these things. And there was this sort of like, well, we're all going to is what you talked about. We're all going to get together, and we're going to take the kids to Disneyland. So Kim, we'll take your kids, and just, you can you can pay me back later. And it was like, I can't afford to send my kids to Disneyland right now. Like I'm in massive, financial fear at the moment. Right. And there was this sort of, resentment because which I understand is a natural part of the grief process, because everyone else is running around with their things that they have, and they're not paying attention to the fact that I don't have them, but that's not their job. Right. I think sometimes we forget in the beginning, it's everyone's job to be thoughtful and kind and think about that. But 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, life goes on. And so
Yeah.
I had to really figure out how to let go of that resentment, so that I could actually get to a place where I could write the book. But
Right.
that's a really good question. And a lot of people don't want to hear that. But yeah, there was a lot of resentment and anger that I had,
Yeah.
after he died, when people tried to do their normal lives. And I was like, my life is not normal.
Well, I can't, no, it's not. And I do feel like the people around you, or any of us in that situation should have, it's not their job to not live their lives, but I think maybe a little bit of awareness just around how this message might land.
Exactly.
If I'm talking about, we're going here and we would just go in here, we just went here last night, or whatever, or maybe they're just complaining inappropriately about, their spouse.
Right.
Those little things, I would think that a little bit of awareness would go a long way with somebody who's going through grief without tiptoeing around. I mean, and we can get into like good strategies and ineffective strategies. The one thing I want to ask you about, and I won't dwell on it.
Mhm.
We talked about this before we recorded back I think it was a couple of months ago, actually. And you had made a remark, something to the effect of the resilience of your kids. And
Mm.
maybe you can comment on that and how maybe grief shows up a little bit later. But that's my observation and the experiences that I've had in life with family members or friends who have lost parents when they were children. I was
Right.
always amazed at how together they were. I had a cousin who
Right.
lost his dad at 5. And I remember every time he would leave the room, I would cry, thinking he didn't know, because he didn't know his dad died. It had
Right.
been a secret. And I would cry on his behalf. And then when he found out, it was very matter of fact. Now he was 5 and probably didn't process it. But
Right.
even
Right.
seeing friends whose children have lost their parents, obviously sadness, no question about it, and grief, but their ability to stay composed and still go out socially,
Right.
it's amazing to me, because I don't think at that time I would have been able to handle that. And maybe I'm wrong, but what was your experience with your kids? How did they respond?
Well, I think first of all, resilience. I mean, people say kids are resilient, and I don't believe that. I think kids need to be taught to be resilient.
Mm,
And what I mean by resilience is the ability to get knocked down and to just know some point along this line, I'm going to be able to get back up. It may not be today, it may not be next month, but I'm going to be able to get back up.
yeah.
And also, it's not a bounce up. I think sometimes people think it's like I hit the bottom and I'm bouncing up to the top. It's not a bounce up. Sometimes it's a crawl, you know. And so with my children, what I see in them is 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 they get knocked down over something else. And sometimes I remind them that this is, remember that this is how you felt after daddy died and you didn't think you'd get over it. And remember how hard it was. And remember how much you cried. And yet here you are over it, right? Or through it. So it's constantly reminding them that they have the ability to get back up. And I think, what I've seen in my children is, and it's so funny because this just recently happened last week with my daughter. I believe very much that when your heart is cracked, you find others who have cracked hearts, similar cracked hearts, right? So the interesting about my kids, they always seem to find other children who have lost parents.
Wow.
And they just meet people, and then they just kind of, they have a conversation, and they're like, my dad died too, and this just happened to my daughter with someone at work. And
Wow.
she noticed in the back of her head, she said, this woman never talks about her dad. Like, she just doesn't bring him up. And my daughter never talks about her father. She doesn't say, oh, my dad and I did this and whatever. And she finally said to this woman, well, my dad died. And the woman's like, oh my gosh, so did mine.
We're going to be a team.
Exactly. So I think that resilience is something that kids need to be taught.
Yeah.
Um, and it's something that I hope that my children learned a little bit from me,
Mhm.
from what it felt like to lose someone who I was fully expecting to spend the rest of my life with, versus now to someone who, who's looking for someone to spend the rest of my life with, right? So it's a very different space. Um, but yeah, I think it's one of those things that it's very hard. It is probably the hardest thing as a parent that I have done, is to let I didn't have a choice. The one thing I really wanted to do to save them from this pain was to bring their father back, and I couldn't do it.
Right.
So I had no choice but to really let them crumble and fall apart, and then to hold space to allow them to pick themselves back up. And
Mhm.
I think that's the hardest part about this whole journey for me, is watching my kids grieve their father,
Mm.
because there's nothing I can do,
Right. Did
you
you
know.
did you notice anything about yourself, Kim, that you didn't notice before? Before Art passed away, was your parenting style different? Did you
Oh
become
yeah.
more protective, more short-tempered?
It changed. I mean, that was a funny thing. In the first couple of weeks, I had a really hard time letting my children get into cars with other people, because it became very clearly, death is very random. It doesn't pick good people over bad people. It does, and I realized that just because my husband just died and I just experienced this tragedy doesn't mean that my kids can't go off and to a car accident and die.
Right.
Like I was really scared. And then I became very loose. I became like, do whatever you want, because I was in the middle of massive grieving.
Yeah.
um and then I started to kind of feel like I could parent again, and kind of bringing in the reins. There were definitely times my temper was really short, because your brain, I think grief, I wish more studies would be done on grief, but grief is a fascinating process in how it affects your brain. And so all your whole thought is around just trying to, this massive loss. And so anything that distracts you from that thinking pisses you off.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
So my kids would be like, doing something normal. And I'd be like, please get up and turn the TV off. And then I'd be like, get up and turn the TV off now. And they would be like, whoa, she went from 0 to 115 in like 2 seconds.
Right. Right.
Um, so there was a lot of repairing that I had to do after I had sort of gone through my intense grief process.
Right.
A lot of repairing I had to do with my children. And then the interesting thing is, when I started to feel better around month 9, my kids started to fall apart.
Mm.
And I talked to grief counselors, and they say this is really common. Kids, just sort of know to hold their crap together. And then when the adult feels like they're kind of they're on solid ground, that's when kids can start to let go. And my youngest at that time was actually asked to leave grief group, because they were seeing signs that he was suicidal. And I remember thinking, a suicidal 7-year-old, I've heard about that in Japan, but like not in the United States.
Right.
And they're like, no, it can. And so we had to remove him from grief group, and he went and saw a special, grief therapist to deal with here's something funny. He said to me, I said, so you want to kill yourself? And he says, yes. And I said, do you have any idea of how you do it? And he goes, well, I'd go to like the Grand Canyon, jump off the cliff, but you won't take me there.
So it's your fault.
It's my fault.
I can't do this. I can't do this without your help.
I'm only 7 and I can't do this by myself.
Right. Right.
Um,
So it wasn't we think he just came right out and said, this is what I want to do.
yeah, he talked about killing himself in grief group. And kids will do that, but after a couple sessions, they were like, this is not just, because sometimes kids will talk about that at that age because they want to be with their parent, and so they see themselves as dying. And the other thing about kids up to age 7, they don't understand that death is permanent.
Yeah.
So sometimes kids will ask, when is my dad going to be done being dead?
Yeah, boy.
So he was on that. So they weren't sure whether it was that he didn't understand that it was permanent, or whether this was really a serious issue. And then they concluded that it was a serious issue and that he needed some extra support.
I'm wondering, I want to get into after I ask this ridiculous question, I want to get into, what people can do, but also what people
Yes.
shouldn't do. And you
Yes.
can pick whatever order we do that in,
Okay.
as it relates to inside and outside of the office. But, the older I get, I remember having this conversation with my grandmother. She lived with us when we were, after my grandfather passed away in 1984, we added to our house. She
Right.
added to our house and moved in with us. And we were talking about, death. And I think I was 13 at the time. And I remember making an agreement with her. I was like trying to get into her head because she was, I don't know, 75, 76.
Right.
Like, you're going to get there before I get there. I'm
Right.
like, is there something else? You got to tell me. We got to make an
Right.
agreement. You come back and tell me, because it's
Right.
something. She goes, I will do that. I will do. So she's been gone since 1993. I haven't seen anything. But now
She's not been back.
no, right. Well, but the thing is I've talked to people who have gone through it. I have a friend who passed, and his wife went to talk to somebody after he passed away. It was probably about 8 months later. And she said the same thing to the psychic, or I don't even know. I just dumped over my vitamins. And the psychic said, what are you talking about? He's been leaving you evidence ever since he left. And then he's been dropping dimes. Have you been noticing dimes around? And so she, all of a sudden, she's like, oh my God, I picked one up yesterday. And so my wife told me this, we were talking about this. And that day, as we were talking about it, I opened my kitchen drawer and something fell out of my drawer. I was just getting like something out of it. And Chrissy says, something just fell out of the drawer. I'm like, I know. What was it? It was a flipping dime. And I'm like, oh. So now I'm not superstitious or anything, but like the older I get, I'm starting to process. I don't know. I go back and forth. What is next, if anything? I go back and forth. So do I have enough faith to really believe when it counts? But I start to go down the path of energy. And I look at all of us as a vehicle that harnesses energy. And somehow that energy just gets unplugged, like a television set or a computer that's on. The body is still there, but once it gets unplugged, the energy is no longer harnessed through that channel, but it's still there. And so when I think about the people that I've known, family and friends that have passed away, I try to just tap into the existence of the energy and try not to think about them in the form of a body. And it brings me some element of peace or understanding. I know that sounds ridiculous, but do you at all relate to that? Or
the way I relate to it is things that he used to really like all of a sudden have become things that have meaning for me. So he was always the one who's like, oh my gosh, sweetheart, look at the sunset. And I'd be like, oh yeah, it's really pretty. Okay, let's go. I still got to do this, right? So I was not that person. And now I see a sunset and I have rolled down my window to the car next to me and be like, look at the clouds,
Wow.
So that's me. And the other thing that, I live in LA and I live in a fairly busy section of LA. So there are a lot of sirens that go by. Yeah. And he used to always see sirens as, he would say to them, go get them, guys. Like he would see them as something hopeful. I would see them as something terrifying because it meant someone needed big help. Right. Yeah. So I've taken that on. So whenever a siren goes by, I say, go get them, guys. And, 2 months ago, been saying this for years. My husband has been dead for 13 years. And I've been saying this for years every time I see a siren, but 2 months ago, a siren went by, I pulled over, let the ambulance go by. And I was like, go get them, guys. And I just started to sob. Right. Yeah. Because I just felt in that moment when I said that, I felt like that's art. That's my husband, that's my husband still inside of me energetically or whatever, but that's him. Yeah. And so I find myself grabbing little pieces of him and doing things that I didn't know that I used to do. I go see his family, and sometimes I see his sister-in-law or his mother do something, and I think I do that. Wow. We're not blood related. And I realize, but we're art related. Yeah. So it's something that he used to do that I've picked up.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I'm done.
Well, you had said, I had listened to a podcast that you had done. It was the very last one you did. And you were talking about milestones. And at the end of it, you said for every year that goes by is a year that he's no longer with me, or I'm getting
Yes.
to a place where my life without him might exceed my life with him years
Yeah.
wise. And my memory of him fades. So on one level, as time passes, there's almost this fear that you don't remember him. And yet at the same time, I hear that example you just gave, and I wonder if you're actually closer to him.
That's a really good question. And I think it's a little bit of both,
Yeah.
right? I think that, I joke in my closet, like I don't know that I own anything. And I sometimes play the game of did I own this before him or after him? Like I just make that joke in my closet. Like, is there anything in here that he would recognize if he came back today?
Mm.
And he's very far from the life that I live right now. When he died, I think I had no hair. I think I was like shaving my head with a one, you know. And so it's very different. But there are some times I feel, close to him. And I think the thing about grief, what I really want people to know is that it's forever changing.
Yep.
Right? The way you feel after month 10 is not the way you feel after year 10.
Right.
And then there are moments that you go right back to it.
Yep.
I'm just looking right now. I don't know if your listeners can see, but I've got a picture. There's a photograph of my oldest son, and you can see the two adults standing in the background. That was my first child. That was, he was 2 years old. We had the photographer take this picture.
Mm-hmm.
And, I look at that photo every day, and then some days it might make me cry. My husband's parents are getting older, and I went and visited them, and I drove away and I cried for an hour in the car heading home, because I'm like, he should be here. He should be seeing this. He should be with them. He should be, they miss him. And also my link to them is also faltering, because the older they get, right? It was the link to his parents that I feel particularly close to. I love his siblings, but I'm not nearly as close to his siblings as I am to him. So there's sort of this regurgitating of loss in various different levels, I think.
Right. And you had commented about just recognizing, I don't know whether it was a couple of years after I passed, all of a sudden you had a different awareness about his loss, that his loss had on other people, his parents.
Yes, that is something that really blew me away, because like I said in the beginning, right, I'm focused on my loss. I'm pissed off at people who aren't recognizing how hard it hit, how lucky they are. So you focus so much on that, and then you're able to take a step back and you get to see the wider circle of who else was affected by that loss. And it is heartbreaking. It is almost like I'm coming into a loss as an outside person to their loss. My mother and father-in-law, I mean, I cry when I think about they lost their oldest son. They now have to go around saying, I have 4 children, but one of them is dead, right? Or they go around saying, I have 3 children. Like, that's heartbreaking to me. That his siblings, that even my niece and nephew remember my husband and their loss from not seeing him in their lives, or watching their parents grieve. Right. His friends still grieve him, still think about him. Every now and then they pop up, the people he worked with. So it's been really powerful to see that, and also just so heartbreaking, because it's so, like we come back to the beginning, it's really hard to watch people we care about hurt.
Yes. And you listen to you talk, this is stuff we hear about every single day. We know somebody, or we watch it on the news, and there are people just leaving this earth as fast as they're coming in.
Yeah.
And it becomes rote, or it
Yeah.
becomes, oh yeah, so-and-so, you hear so-and-so, oh yeah, the guy down the street just passed away. And it's very, you're not connected to it. But when you actually talk to somebody, and they're, especially when a younger person, any loss is difficult, but when like right in the prime of someone's life, it's like, no, this shouldn't happen. Like I can't conceive of it. But maybe we can just transition a little bit into, you decided to take these, you were in HR before Art passed,
yes.
correct?
Yeah.
So you came back to HR with kind of a different mindset about it, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, I want to talk about how you help the companies, but I mean, you're helping human beings. So we can do it under the umbrella of a manager or an HR department, which is totally fine. But I was thinking about, where do you want to take this? I'm interested in things people could and should do versus what they shouldn't. And
Right.
some of your examples of shouldn't, I love, because I think there are so many of us guilty of those things, like the wide
Yep.
eyes or the overly, like, so can you pick where we take this? But I think either direction is helpful.
Well, why don't I walk people through kind of my 5-step process? And this works for companies and managers, and it works for, regular people. And so the first thing I have people do is to sit down and acknowledge, let's just focus on death. Acknowledge the loss. It hurts. Cry, scream, feel the sadness. And I think that we often, we were talking about, you didn't want to kind of be the person who was like falling apart and at your friend's funeral. And I think sometimes we really try hard to hold ourselves together because we're afraid of what it looks like, or we don't want to be the person who gets all the attention, or honestly, sometimes we feel like we will never stop crying. Like we will, like, if I let go now, I'm not only grieving this person's loss, but all the losses I felt in my life are going to come out. And this is going to be a 4-day crying jag, and someone's going to commit me.
Right.
So, but the most important thing to do is to actually feel that sadness. And it's not a one and done.
Right.
And the reason is because that stuff leaks out of us.
Yeah.
And if we don't feel the sadness, is sometimes there's resentment, and sometimes there's anger, and sometimes there's like, screw you. I, was just about to get mad at you about this. We just had a fight. How dare you die before we get that resolved, right? There's guilt. So there's a lot of stuff involved in loss. And so if you can feel those feelings, you're able to kind of approach them openly and knowing what to say, which is step number 2. So knowing what to say. There isn't one great thing to say. I wish there was, because it would make everybody's life a lot easier. There's a lot of really bad things to say. And the reason that we often say these negative things, these bad, and sometimes inadvertently mean things. I mean, I don't think anyone went out to hurt me when they said the things that they said. They were trying to make me feel better, but they were kind of in a space where they hadn't felt their own feelings about this or any other kind of loss. So they were sympathetic, which means that they were sort of judgmental and thinking about what I should do, and not empathetic, which is, holy cow, this is happening to her. This is so hard. I can't even imagine. Like, so there's a difference in that. Mm-hmm. And when I tell people what to say, I always say the first thing is, don't say, if you need anything, let me know. And there are 3 specific reasons why that's a bad thing to say. 1, what is anything? Like, it's just too big. I mean, Dave, I would love to help you. Can I, do you want me to like organize the books in the background alphabetically? Is that helpful? Or, like, do your kids need a ride to school, or is somebody sick and they need to run them to the hospital? Like, what is anything? It's too big a word to offer. And even though you mean it in the moment, you really don't mean anything. Because if I came over to you and said, my son just got into a car accident, I need someone to wipe his butt, is that the anything that you meant? Probably not, right? So
I'll think about it.
Exactly. I'll think about it. Exactly.
I'll get back to you on that, Kim. I'll call you tomorrow.
Exactly. And then the second thing is, you're asking the person who is already in crisis to figure out what you mean by, to like take apart their life and find that one bite-sized thing that you might be willing to do. And the third reason it's not helpful is because, let's say they do figure it out, then you're asking them to get extremely vulnerable when their life is ripped apart. Like they're like walking around, nerves are all flung all over the place. And now you're asking this person who's really vulnerable to ask you to do something that you may not want to do. And their nightmare is to hear you go, okay, I'll do that. Like that's what we're all thinking, right? And we all know how hard it is to ask for help anyway. Right. So that's why it's not the best thing to say. So when you touch in with your feelings about how you feel about this loss that is occurring in this person's life, and also to you, it allows you to touch into a space that allows you to approach them with a much more open heart. So you're not saying things like, stay strong, or someone said to me, couple months after my husband died, you know what, Kim? It's okay because you're young and you can still remarry. Like, oh, that solves all my sadness. You're right. I can get married again. How
Right.
silly of me not to think that.
Right.
Um,
Well, they've
so
decided what might be going on in your head when it's like, I'm not even thinking of that.
exactly, because they're being sympathetic and not empathetic,
And
right? If they're
did you feel, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you
Mhm.
feel misunderstood in those moments by friends? Like, or did you give them a pass?
A lot of times I gave him a pass because honestly, I was just too tired and too distraught to deal with it. I was like, you know what, you do you. I can't.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would get angry, but I never said anything to them.
Yeah.
And then, now when someone says, something that's not helpful, I say, hey, I know you mean well, because that's the thing. Everyone who said something to me meant well. They really wanted me to be happy. They wanted to make me feel better.
Yeah.
So it didn't come out of meanness. It just came out of just not knowing.
Right.
So I often say to people, be specific. Like if you really want to help, say, hey, Dave, this may not be a big thing for you, but I'm happy to organize your books in alphabetical order for you. And you go, oh my God, thank you, because I'm needing to do that, right? Or, hey, Dave, that garage light that has not been working for the past 6 months, I gotcha. I'm going to take care of that for you. Or I am going to the grocery store. I want you to open up your cabinet and tell me what 5 things are you almost out of. I will pick them up and drop them off at your doorstep. Right.
Yeah.
So the more specific you are, the better. And you need to offer more than once, because that person who's going, look, I looked okay. I mean, actually, when my husband died, other than the fact that I looked kind of gaunt, I looked pretty good. I was skinny,
Yeah. You don't look like you need anything.
I
Yeah.
didn't look
Right.
like I needed anything.
Right.
And my personality kind of this is my personality. So I sort of people, which, I think my personality definitely took a hit. So I will take that back. But, I was not dealing with a full deck of cards, and people would come up and say things to me, and they would walk away and I'd be like, what did they just say to me?
Right.
So that person that you're dealing with is not dealing with a full deck of cards. They may look like they have a full deck of cards and they may sound like it, but they are not. They don't have a full deck of cards.
I have a question.
Yes.
And I don't want to jump ahead. If I'm jumping ahead, tell me to
No,
shut
go
up.
ahead.
So you were talking about how to help people be helpful or
Yep.
say the right things. Did you ever have anybody that was just too in your face? Or is that something
Yes.
you're gonna get to later?
Yes. Well, we will get to that.
Okay.
But no. It's a really good question, because that's where we talk about how helping, how to really be helpful, especially at work. Because what happens oftentimes at work is there will be there's kind of a gamut of employee responses, and some employees are like, they just want to help, they just want to get in there, help, and they do it for the wrong reasons. So those people tend to come in to help. I actually have a section in my book which says, if you're looking for an award for being the most helpful, if you're looking for your friend to be like, and I wouldn't be able to get through this without Dave, if you're looking for that, go to like the ASPCA and go walk dogs and help puppies. Like, that's going to be the reward that you're going to get.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people help for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And those people will sometimes come in very ferociously, want to help a lot in a lot of different ways. And it's really difficult to kind of back up from them. Now, there are other people, a woman who became a very good friend of mine. Our kids went to school together. I didn't know her that well. It's just, hey, how are you? How are the kids? We'd stop and chat. She came into my life and just helped in so many different ways, and she wasn't pushy about it. She just would say, I'm going to the dry cleaners. Do you have anything to go to dry cleaners? And I was able to call her one day when my son literally grew out of a pair of shoes overnight, which we hear kids do. So, and she went shoe shopping. She literally went to the shoe store, bought, 5 different pairs of shoes in 3 different sizes, and dropped them all off at my house. We tried them all on. And then she came by and picked them all up and returned them all. Mm-hmm. So those type of people do come in. But there are people oftentimes at work who are feeling the need to take care of everything and everyone, and they can get overly zealous on helping. And that's when it's really helpful if you have a manager who can control the situation and who you've had a conversation with about how you are willing to accept kinds of help and how that works. Mm-hmm. Then that's really helpful, because that person won't be able to get in there and kind of take that sort of control, that overzealous help.
What advice would you give to somebody who's maybe not working that could be in that situation, and they've got a friend who's trying really hard to be helpful, but really what they're doing is invading their space. They don't
Yeah.
have the room to grieve. They don't have the room to be off their game. They feel
Yep.
like they're out, you know what I mean? What would you
I
say?
would say, I think a lot of us have various different types of friends. And I always recommend, if you can, find those 2 or 3 people to put up a wall around you.
Yeah,
And so this person now really, really wants to help. And then you send them and say, hey, you know what? Janice, Tori is taking care of that for me. So why don't you reach out to her? Because I just can't, I'm feeling so overwhelmed right now.
yeah,
And then Tori, Janice will reach out to Tori, and Tori will say, here's what you can do,
yeah.
and kind of limit, so she can be the buffer. So I highly recommend you find a buffer, someone who's willing to field all those calls for you, because it can get really intense.
Good,
And it
good.
could be your mother-in-law. I mean, it could be anybody. It doesn't have to, it has to be someone who's not afraid to say, yeah, no.
Well, it might be, yeah, it might be somebody else who wants to join you in the grief, and their way of doing it is different.
Yep.
And it's almost in the way of you grieving, I would think.
Yes.
You could run into that. I
Yes.
cut you off. So you're on your second step on what to say.
So,
Keep
yeah.
going.
Yeah. So there's the what to say. And that really, there is no good thing to say. I think one of the best things you can say to somebody is, I don't know what to say, right? Those words are so perfect because it really encompasses the situation.
Yeah.
It's shocking. It's horrible. You are left speechless, and
Yeah.
that's okay to say. I want to say something that's going to make you feel better. I don't know what to say. I'm just so sorry. Right.
Thank you. Thank you. Because that's my default. I don't ever know what to say. I feel
Yeah.
actually, okay, maybe I did something right. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
I have a
like,
feeling you do a lot. I have a feeling you do a lot more right than you think.
I don't know. But I actually feel better because I'm like, I don't know what to say. I
Yeah.
really just don't. I'm in a
Yeah.
panic. But
And most of us don't. I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
And so, not knowing what to say is acknowledging that you don't know what to say is the perfect thing to talk about.
Okay.
So the next thing you want to do is kind of take an assessment. And now in a business, you're taking assessment of what the employee has, of the work, of the company, of what the company offers, of your manager skills. On a personal level, you're assessing what you can and cannot do. You're just, look, I am not going to bring you a meal. I love you. I think you're great, Dave. I want to take care of you and your family, but do not ask me to bring a meal because it's not happening. However, I am a world's best grocery shopper. And if there's something that's not on the shelf, I will find out when that truck is coming in, and I will be there first thing in the morning to get that thing for you. So it's really understanding what your helping superpower is, right? So that's my helping superpower. I will take your teenagers out and we will have a good old time, and they will look at me and laugh at me so hard because I will be the biggest goofball that I'll take their mind off of what's happening at home. Toddlers, I can put up with them for about a half an hour and then I'm good.
Right.
Right.
So you know your limitations.
Know your limitations, know what you can and cannot do.
Yeah.
Because don't feel like, a lot of us feel like we need to bring meals or we need to do something that we're uncomfortable doing. And the part of helping is it helps you, but it doesn't help you if you're rolling your eyes and being like, oh, I got to do this thing. Right. That I promised I do, that I really don't even like doing, right? So take an assessment of what you're good at, and work that can look like a lot of things. Maybe you're the joke person on the team who makes people laugh. That can be your job. Right. Your job can be to make the person on your team with cancer giggle once a week. Yeah. Right. And however you want to do it, you do it. Maybe you're super organized and you know that employee has to put this agenda together and doesn't like the agenda, doesn't like doing that. And you love putting agendas together. You like that sense of organization, right? Or you like taking notes in meetings. So that can be the thing that you do, right? That can be the offer that you make and the thing that you do. But it's really making sure you take an assessment and make sure that you're doing something that isn't bringing pain to you, because helping is not supposed to be painful. Yeah. And I think that we sometimes forget that we feel like somehow we have to sacrifice to be the best helper in the world. And the best helpers in the world are the ones who show up with a great amount of love and open arms in their heart. And those are the ones who are doing things in their sweet spot, right? Do things that really, really matter for them.
I gotta ask you a question. You a question. And I know I'm probably going to go over with you. I want to be respectful of your time. So I have a a friend who was recently diagnosed. It turns out to be very slow moving. It was alarming at first, but he's
Right.
going to be okay.
Yep.
And we bust all of this group. We really kill each other. I mean, we
Right.
bust each other's chops. So, so it's not off limits. So the other day we were together and he said something and we immediately brought up you just brought up this diagnosis to get attention. Now,
Right.
like, so everything became about him seeking attention. And so
Right.
I was just curious. I mean, obviously it's inappropriate and we said more than that.
Right.
But trying to bring some levity to what otherwise could feel heavy. I don't know what your take is. What's your take?
I'm all for it 100%. I had a friend who used to leave me a joke on my answering machine. And this is early on when Art died. And sometimes it was the only time during the day I heard myself laugh.
Oh,
Right. I mean, it was brilliant. And that's the thing is I don't want, look, there are plenty of people out there who are going to be like, and for those who can't see me, I'm rubbing my shoulder. My eyes are really big and, oh, poor you. Are you okay? How are you? Like your friend who's dealing with that has plenty of those people
right.
who think it's very serious, who take it very seriously. And look, losing someone you care about is serious matter. It's very, very painful. But one of the best things you can do is be that person that they know for levity.
Yep.
That you can give them a hard time. And yeah, the attention seeking, I'm sure that was so funny. And you guys all riffed on it and it felt really good and everybody laughed. And then afterwards, there's a moment of like, yeah, and you still have cancer and that sucks. Right. Yeah. So that's perfectly okay. I really want to encourage people to have normal conversations.
Right.
Do you hear
right.
that?
I do. Is it a bus or a plane?
Yeah, no, it's a truck.
That's
Someone's
fine.
this trucker's really mad about something.
Yeah. It adds some ambiance to the conversation. But keep
City
going.
life.
Yeah, keep going, Kim.
Yes. So the next thing after you do the assessment is then you can take thoughtful action, right? This is where your actions really matter. So this is where we talked about already. You can write the agenda. You can be the person who leads the joke. You can be the person who picks up their kids every Friday, whatever it is. You can take that thoughtful action that is really meaningful to you, but also to the person who's dealing with the crisis or with the loss in their life. And I really want to encourage someone. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, like talk about humor. This person I know came up to me about 9 months after my husband died. And she's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was unable to help you. I didn't do anything. I just felt really bad. I just couldn't.
I hear the truck. Don't worry about it.
Okay. All right. This is really bad. I just want to know who they're beeping at because someone is pissing them off. Like, you know what? Someone's blocking something. The trucker's like, this is my spot. You're not supposed to be here. Move out of the way. So she came up to me in tears, oh my God, I just feel so bad. I didn't do anything. Honestly, I didn't remember. I was in the middle of grief, wasn't thinking about who showed up and who didn't show up. And then I looked at her and I smiled and I said, it's okay. He's going to be dead for a while. There's still time.
God.
Right. And she had this moment of horror on her face and then she cracked up. Right.
Wow.
So
ice broken.
Ice broken. So humor is so important. Just be who you are. Show up to your person, your coworker, your friend, as you normally show up. You don't have to talk about the grief or the loss. If you want to find out how you're doing, one of the great phrases you can ask is, how are you doing right now? Right. It's not how are you doing, because someone who asks how are you doing, they think they want the guts and the glory, but they really don't. Right. They don't really want to hear about that you spent 45 minutes crying on the floor and you got up and then you just found a piece of rice on your face that's been there now for the last half an hour that no one's told you about. Right. They don't want to hear that part of it.
Right.
But when you say to them, how are you doing right now? Or how are you doing today? That allows them to take a step back and to kind of talk about in their space. Maybe they don't want to talk about it. Maybe they do, but that's a really important thing. So thoughtful action is really important. And then the next thing, I was going to say, you don't have to help right away. Like, it's so powerful. It was really powerful to me that people came in at 6 months and 9 months and helped, because all the support dies away around 3 to 4 months. And then it kind of starts to kind of filter out and kind of go down. So
and that's when you feel the stillness of the house, right?
That's when you feel the stillness of the house. That's when you go, wow, he's really dead. And everyone has gone back to work. everyone is now back to their normal lives. So it's a very lonely time.
Right.
So if you can help at 9 months, if you celebrate their anniversary and call them up and say, I was thinking about you in this day, and you share a story about the person who has died, that's so powerful. You show up a year and a half later going, hey, do you want lasagna or chicken tonight for dinner? I mean, I still needed meals a year and a half after my husband died. So whatever you can do at that time is just so helpful. So don't feel like you need to take thoughtful action in such a short period of time. If death happened, it's going to be a reoccurring anniversary, and there's really no time limit on offering support.
What
And
about
then the
music?
last,
What about music? Before you go to the last one, do you listen to music differently?
I do.
Comments on that?
And I love that. A friend of mine actually put together, when Art was first diagnosed with cancer, she put together a music list, which I haven't listened to in a really long time, that literally I would just cry. It was the best crying music list. It was so helpful. And so I would listen to it on crying on, after dropping the kids off at school, or crying on my way to work, or whatever it was. And she put it together when Art was first diagnosed, and I found it again after he died.
Wow.
And so it was really powerful. So yeah, music is a great way to support and help as well.
Okay. Go to your last bullet, because I know I keep cutting you off. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. And the last one is moving forward. And that just simply means, if there's a death or an anniversary, even if it's cancer, and you remember the day that they were diagnosed, the day you heard the news, acknowledge it. Acknowledge it. And in that moving forward, I think it's really the most important thing I really want people to know, more than anything else, and this is why I do what I do, is that you matter, and the small little thing that you think is not useful and feels so incredibly inadequate matters. And I think I said this in the beginning, that, I'm not here because I'm super courageous or I was able to get through my husband's death. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because a bunch of people decided that they mattered enough to show up on my doorstep and to do these little things that allowed me to get through, to put one pinky toe in front of the other and come out the other side. So I want people to know that there's nothing too small that you can do. There's no words, the worst thing you can do is do nothing. Any words you offer, even if they're the wrong ones, the beauty of that is you get to go back and do it again.
Yeah. It's helpful. It's helpful, Kim, for those that want to, for those that want to reach you. I'm assuming management professionals, HR professionals that might have employees dealing with this. How do they reach you? How do they find your book? Under what circumstances, other than what I just said, should they be contacting you?
Well, thank you for asking. So there's a couple of things. First of all, you can get, I know I mentioned one thing never to say, but I actually have 5 top things never to say to anybody dealing with cancer or loss. And they can find out the other 4 by going to 100actsoflove.com/what not to say. No spaces, nothing, what not to say. And that's the number 100. For professionals who would like to reach out to me for a strategy session, they can do so on LinkedIn. That is the best place to reach me. They can also go to my website at 100actsoflove.com, and they can look at the services, and they can book a strategy session there. And if you want to buy my book, it's available on Amazon, but it's also available on 100actsoflove.com. And I love telling people about this because I can sign the book. If you buy it through me, I can sign the book. I can gift it to your team. I can do we can do all sorts of different things so that there's more personal touch to them. So if you like that, you can go to 100actsoflove.com, and you can also hit /shop. That's where you can find it.
Excellent.
So yeah, all those different places.
Kim Hamer, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Dave, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you. You're doing so much better than you think. You really are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. Take care.
You too.